Hello. Sorry about that. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We have a lot of faces in here today. I'm going to ask you to please remain muted. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen while we wait for more people to join. Just letting you know real quick that for now, we really want everybody to be muted, but you'll have some time to speak at some point. So you'll have a chance to provide feedback or ask any questions. So let me just go ahead and share my screen while we wait for more people to join. All right. While we wait for more people to join, I just want to mention real quick that we have an interpreter. His name is Jim, and if you need an interpreter, you'll be able to click on the little three dots on top of his window, and then you can pin his screen, so that way you'll always see him on top. So just in case you do need an interpreter, you'll be able to uh, look at Jim's screen. And if you're new to Zoom, there's a couple of things that I just wanted to remind you. Please remain muted. Normally, the options you'll find at the bottom of your screen. So there's like the mute option. Please remain muted while the presentation is taking place. You'll be able to use an option called raise hand. This means that once you click on that, your name is going to appear on top of my screen, and I'll be able to call your name, and you'll be able to unmute and ask your questions or provide your comments or feedback. In the meantime, I would like to invite everybody to use the chat option to maybe say their names, just letting us know if you guys live in the neighborhood or where you're watching us from today. If you hear some background, my dog is hungry. And also we have a closed caption option that I actually just activated. If you don't need that, you can deactivate it. And just letting you know that this meeting is being recorded. So maybe in the meantime, if you want to use the chat to say hi, ask your questions that, hopefully we'll be answering at some point, please feel free to do that. In the meantime, I'm just going to let a couple more people sign in, and then we'll be ready to start soon. I see people using the chat. Thank you so much for doing that. I see some familiar faces and new faces as well. And again, if you just join the meeting, just letting you know real quick that this meeting is being recorded, and to please remain muted for as long as the presentation is taking place. You'll have time to speak. In order for you to do that, you'll be able to use the raise hand option, which is going to be at the bottom of your screen. Once I see that you click on that and that your name is up, I'll be able to call your name, and then you'll be able to speak for around 2 minutes. Hopefully, we have enough time for everybody to provide their input and ask their questions. Other than that, we have an interpreter. We have Jim. So if you need American Sign Language interpretation, you can always look at his window, and there's going to be 3 dots, and you can pin his screen so that he's always going to be on top for you to see. But yeah, I guess we have around 44 people. Again, feel free to use the chat if you want to say hi, if you want to ask questions, provide feedback. But yeah, I guess we can go ahead and start. I'm just going to pass it along to Karina Ricks, the director of DOMI.
Great. Hello, everyone. So I'm Karina Ricks. I'm the director of the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure. Glad to see really good turnout today. This is when maybe we're a little bit glad for Zoom meetings that we don't have to head out into rainy, wet conditions to participate in things like this. But nonetheless, we're glad to have good participation here. So some folks have been to previous meetings of these, others might be new to this. If you want to go, Ricardo, to the next screen. So we did introductions. I'm joined here by members of my team, Kim Lucas, who's the Assistant Director for Policy Planning and Permitting in the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure. Cassandra is leading our Move Forward PGH initiative, which is an initiative to provide safe, complete streets for the city, and that's a partnership together with Healthy Ride, which Ricardo is joining us from Healthy Ride, which is our much beloved bike share provider in the city, and Bike Pittsburgh. Anna Tang is here, and she'll be in and out of the chat helping us from Bike Pittsburgh. So go to the next slide. This is just the agenda that we'll cover today. So going over what this project is, what we've done to date, how we've engaged people, what we're trying to accomplish here, and then different alternatives where we are now in the process and where we hope to go sometime this year. So go ahead, Ricardo. So starting first with sort of what is the big picture that we're trying to accomplish here. Go to the next slide if you would. So the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure is organized around 5 goals. I know many of you who've been to these meetings have heard us talk about them before. The first goal really is one of safety, that no one dies or is seriously injured traveling on our city streets. No one wants to be the motorist who injures or God forbid kills another traveler on the road. No one obviously wants to experience that or have a loved one go through that. So we believe that this is accomplishable. We believe that this is something that can be done. We do it by reducing speeds. We do it by providing safe facilities. We do it through education and enforcement, but that's our very first goal, is that no one dies because of the condition of our streets. The second goal is about access, that we think that all households have a right to fresh fruits and vegetables within 20 minutes travel of home, and that we can't assume that they have a private automobile with which to do this trip. That trip, you know, fresh fruits and vegetables is just sort of an indicator trip. It might be, you know, that all households can access quality education or good jobs or healthcare or open space within this same travel time, but that we need to give them the means to do that. And again, not assume that private automobiles are enjoyed by all households in our city. 20% of our households, in fact, do not have access to an automobile. Our third goal is that walking, rolling, and biking are joyful means of travel, particularly for those very short distance trips. So again, 20% of the motor vehicle trips taken in the city of Pittsburgh pre-pandemic, but 20% of the motor vehicle trips taken in Pittsburgh are driven, or I'm sorry, are less than 1 mile in distance. So they're driven in an automobile for less than a mile. That adds a lot of traffic onto our neighborhood streets. It adds a lot of emissions to our air. It adds a lot of risk and danger to people traveling on there for these very short distance trips, mostly because it's either not convenient or not safe or not comfortable to make those short distance trips in an alternative mode. So we want to change that. We want to make walking safe. We want to make biking enjoyable. We want to enable other travel and accessible. The fourth goal is that no household needs to spend more than 45% of household income on basic housing and basic mobility. Transportation is the second highest household cost after housing on average. For our lowest income residents, transportation costs actually exceed the cost of housing for our lowest income residents. So we really need to pay attention. We've got some great affordable housing initiatives going on in the city. We need to balance that with affordable transportation initiatives as well. So this is part of that. And then our fifth goal is just that the quality of our streets and rights of way reflect the values of our community. We are the city of Mr. Rogers. We're the neighborhood of Mr. Rogers, one of love, one of neighborliness. We want to make sure that our streets really reflect those values. And when people come and visit our great city, that they see that reflected through and through. Go to the next slide, Ricardo. This initiative is also there to implement a policy that was adopted by City Council back in 2015, which is the requirement that Pittsburgh provide a safe and complete network for all modes of travel, regardless of how people travel, someplace in our city. It does not mean that every street needs to have a bike lane on it, but it does need to be that there is a safe place in the network somewhere nearby that people choosing that mode of travel can go, again, without feeling a high degree of stress, threat, or injury. Go to the next slide. That's the policy. Sorry, we can go ahead, but you can read that at your leisure. Adopted in November 2016. Go ahead. You can click a couple of times more. So again, this is just a recap of this part of the network. You can see the bike facilities that we have right now in this area of the city. They kind of start and stop. We've got them on Whiteman. We've got a couple blocks of Beacon. You know, they come in on pieces of Forbes and of course Beechwood Boulevard, which is a great one, but they're not connected. They don't get you to this wonderful business district that we have. They don't really get you from park to park, which are really big generators and destinations for people for recreation and daytime and other trips. And so that's the goal that we're trying to get to here. Go ahead, Ricardo, if you click forward. We're looking for that complete connection. What's going to help get us from end to end, not only for people traveling by bicycle, but for people walking and using other smaller devices as well, kids with kick scooters, other kinds of things that we see about the neighborhood, making sure that we have that safe connection for them. Go ahead to the next slide. So we've been meeting with people and really appreciate the feedback that we've gotten. If you go ahead, Ricardo, please. This is part of a process overall of where we're trying to evolve this to. So it begins really with that project identification and data collection. That's that notion that we do have this disconnected network here, that we need to finish the linkages to get people where they're going. Looking at the objectives are safety, the objectives are access, the objectives are enjoyment and low stress. Looking at developing alternatives and evaluating those alternatives. That was our last meeting. We talked about various approaches that were predominantly focused on Beacon Street. But as a result of that conversation, actually we'll talk today, a really good alternative also arose from that we'll talk some more about today that seems to use sort of the native knowledge of the community to provide an even better option. We're hoping in this meeting that we can get to that preferred alternative and actually move forward to more design refinement and ultimately to implementation. So we're progressing down this project development process, but still have several steps more to go before we get to construction. And then it is all of our streets are a continuous process of evaluation and improvement. So even after something is put in place, we'll still be here with you looking at, you know, what happened, how can we improve it, what needs to be adjusted, what needs to be amended or added to that network. Go to the next slide, Ricardo. We have had this series of meetings, so it began at the beginning of the month with a walkthrough with Beacon Street neighbors. Unfortunately, on a cold and blustery day, as August would offer to us, on April 8th, we did have a well-attended public meeting where we talked about a number of these different alternatives. That was followed on April 20 by a much more pleasant weather walkthrough with residents of Bartlett Street, which was one of the alternatives that was raised at the Beacon meeting. Here we are today, then at the second public meeting for these connections. And then through May, we'll do some follow-up feedback, some surveying, some other information gathering from you as a result of this meeting. Go ahead. So talked about the alternatives. So when we first came to you last meeting, we talked about, it was really focused on Beacon Street. And we talked about a number of different alternatives that would be possible for Beacon Street. It is a fairly wide street. There are existing bike lanes on a portion of it. One of the proposals we talked about was parking protected bike lanes. So moving the parking out from the curb, putting the people on bikes nearest to the curb a little bit of buffer between the cars and between the people on bikes and the parked vehicles, then parking, and then the travel lanes in the center of the street, and fitting that in down the length of Beacon Street. There was a lot of consternation that was raised about pickup and drop-offs, about just the arrangement of that, moving the parking away from the curb as it was, some of the major institutions that are along the street, and some of the challenges that they might have, transit and transit boardings and lightings. So some major concerns about that. The other alternative we talked about was a buffered, striped and buffered bike lane down Beacon Street. So continuing the bike lane that is there on the segment that leads to Whiteman, but augmenting it with additional hash marks and buffering, as you see on Whiteman itself. So using that treatment on Beacon where we can, where we have the space, and then in the eastern segment of Beacon, it would just be a non-buffered bike lane that would go down the length of that, taking that third travel lane that exists in that segment and splitting it into two bike lanes on either side of the street. That still remains a viable alternative, and we'll talk about that one. And then the third alternative that we spoke about was actually taking the bike lanes and putting them right in the center of Beacon Street. So it would be a bi-directional. We did talk briefly about a bi-directional bike facility on one or the other side of Beacon, but that had many concerns about it. The bike lanes in the center of the street were looked at again. That required a number of trade-offs and introduced certain conflicts at intersections. We came into some space constraints as you got into the eastern end. And there was a preponderance of public comment about a number of different alternatives that made us revisit those alternatives. The two alternatives that carry forward now from that are still the Beacon Street alternative, where we would take the bike lanes that are started on Beacon Street that go from essentially from the park to Whiteman, improve them as buffered bike lanes in the segment almost to Murray, where we have adequate space to do that, and then add just striped bike lanes in the segment from Murray to Shady and beyond. So that remains a viable alternative. There is space to do that. There are certain trade-offs that are required with that alternative. The other thing we heard at the first meeting was really look at some of the local neighborhood streets, because the wisdom of local people who bike is to take these neighborhood streets. Particularly Bartlett was one that was raised over and over again as being the place that people would tend to go. We then did the walkthrough with neighbors on Bartlett. Generally, there was a lot of complementary kind of benefits that would come there. We've gotten traffic calming requests from Bartlett, that there's some segments that experience excessive speeding, some segments that have traffic volumes out of scale with what should be expected on that street. Also concerns about parking impacts. So if we do that, what's going to happen to parking? Multiple 311 filings over the years for pedestrian safety at intersections, and how to pedestrians safely cross Whiteman, how to pedestrians safely cross Shady. So doing a complete street improvement on Bartlett would also address some of those concerns. So we'll talk through the alternative of Bartlett today. So those two alternatives are still viable. And we'll talk about maybe what our recommendation is between the two at the end, and get your feedback. Go to the next slide, please, Ricardo. Go to the next slide. Oh, this was just quickly the 5 alternatives, as I talked about, that were previously discussed at that meeting. So go ahead. Go ahead. So these are the two we're talking about now. The blue would be the connection using Bartlett Street, getting us all the way to Beechwood Boulevard. So it would take us park to park. in this connection. And then the yellow is the extension of the existing Beacon Street bike lanes. And then both of them would ultimately use Shaw Avenue to finish that, or Shaw Street to finish that last little connection. Go to the next slide. Next slide. So just some quick statistics to think about as we talk about these. So Beacon Street, it's about a little less than half a mile long. It varies in width, as we talked about, the wider section being about 66 feet in width, the narrower section being 60 feet. In width, it does have an existing 6-foot bike lanes in that segment from the park to Whiteman. It has fairly significant traffic volumes, almost 7,000 vehicles a day, which is manageable for a street like this. It's appropriate for the function that this street has, and then it serves. So we wouldn't necessarily want to shift that traffic to other places, but it is substantial traffic when you're talking about mixing people on bikes together with those volumes. The posted speed is 25 miles per hour. We have in our speed analysis, observed some moderate speeding issues on the corridor where people are exceeding the posted speed. There's moderate to high parking demand. It varies along the corridor, with the higher demand being closer to Murray, and then as you get closer to the institutions on the east end of it. It does have a bit of a history of crashes on a corridor like this. So 22 crashes in a 4-year, the most recent 4-year span that data is available for. 12 of those crashes resulted in serious injury. And there was one crash that involved a person on a bicycle and one crash that involved a pedestrian in that. So those crashes is a little bit more than we'd like to see. Well, we'd like to see none, but it is a little bit more than what might be typical for a street like this. Go to the next slide. So the concept that was, sort of where we've winnowed down the alternatives to on this is to do the buffered and or striped bike lanes on the corridor. The benefits of doing this, as we discussed sort of the priorities and the concerns that people had, the benefits are that it maintains the quality and location of on-street parking. So on-street parking would remain immediately adjacent to the curb. It wouldn't be any real impact on the quantity of legal parking that's there. There's some amount of traffic calming benefits because the travelway of the street, the vehicular travelway of the street is narrowed. So that does have some traffic calming benefits. It is only paint, so it's more limited than the benefits that would be derived from the parking protected bike lanes, but it can still lower that. The lower traffic speeds can lower the traffic noise if people are traveling a little bit slower. With this option, we would add pedestrian crossings at key locations that are currently unmarked. So we talked about Munhall and we talked about Murdoch as being locations where additional safe pedestrian crossings are possible. And those might enable some degree of street beautification to go along with some of those crossing enhancements. The challenges are still, we have bicyclists having conflicts at intersections and driveway entries. Our goal is to provide an all ages and abilities bicycle connection. As we've mentioned before, we know that there's, really, 15 to 20% of people that regularly bicycle, maybe not commute bicycle, but will regularly bicycle for various errands and activities that they have in their day. But we do know from surveys that substantially more people are sort of, would like to have that option, but are quite intimidated by what the streets offer right now. They'd like to go out with their family, with their kids, with their older adults, friends and relatives, but the streets just don't lend themselves to that. This would not necessarily change that. This would still be for the more sophisticated, more confident person on a bicycle to use a buffered or striped bike facility. In part because the bicycles remain in the door zone of the car. So the door zone is when particularly the driver's side doors open they open right into that bicycle travel lane, and bicyclists risk either running into the door or needing to jog into the adjacent moving traffic. It may require alterations to existing turn lanes in order to get this fit in there, particularly as we go down to the eastern end. And it does not really get us all the way into the park, because Beacon Street narrows way down as it gets into the park, and there's not adequate space in that segment to get us all the way to the park. Can you go to the next slide, Cardo? So then Bartlett was the next corridor that we looked to, just one street to the north of Beacon. As this goes end to end, because this includes the segment that doesn't have the segment that has bike lanes in on Beacon was not included in that calculation of distance. So this one includes the whole length of it end to end. It's about a mile, a little more than a mile. It's a narrow street, just 30 feet wide compared to the 60 feet of Beacon. There's no existing bike facilities on it right now. Traffic volumes are pretty low. So less, just right around 1,000 vehicles a day, which is a very nice low volume residential street, particularly on that eastern end, is where the lowest volumes are. It does creep up to about 3,700 vehicles a day, which is more than we would expect for a street like Bartlett. And those volumes are particularly start to aggregate as you get into that section between Murdoch and Serpentine, where we see that there's some traffic gathering there. Sorry, I'm just needing to move my screen because the words are covering the notes that I need to read. There have also been a fair number of crashes on this street as well, which is somewhat surprising. So 7 serious crashes and others with injuries. Sorry, Ricardo, I have to change my view. I don't know how to turn off the captioning. Sorry, which is getting in my way. If you want to, there, I can do that. Okay. If you want to go to the next slide, that'd be great. So what we would talk about on Bartlett Street then would be essentially a neighborway, which is sort of a wide category of treatments that would be there, but it's essentially a low volume, low speed street, a livable street that would be suitable for all ages and abilities to use. It's also very nice as a residential street because of the associated traffic calming that's part of that. As far as street typologies go, it kind of falls in the middle. So you can see the buffered, the striped bike lane is sort of that second one over, which is, it is a supporting facility. It does provide space for bicyclists. It doesn't really fall into that all ages and abilities category. Buffered bike lanes, again, which is what we're talking about for the wider segment of Beacon, are a step better than just the striped bike lanes. Neighborways are yet better still. Protected bike lanes are even better because now there's actually a physical barrier rather than the bicyclists traveling in mixed traffic. And then fully separated mixed use paths and fully separated river paths are really the highest order. So this falls into that kind of nice, nice way, middle way. If we go to the next slide. So just walking through kind of how would we accomplish this on Bartlett. So the segment, so Bartlett changes between being a two-way segment to a one-way segment back to a two-way segment, as you know. The two-way segment of Bartlett between Murdoch and the park is the place where we really see the increased speed. So we've done some speed studies there. There's higher speeds there. There's higher volumes there. So for that to really work, And PS, we've gotten requests from neighbors for traffic calming in this segment as well. So this is where we can kill two birds with one stone, responding to neighbor responses and also improving this network condition. We would need to either divert traffic, potentially by making it a one-way toward Murdoch, so that you would have opposing one-ways, or we would need to implement a traffic diverter so that it would make it difficult to go the full length end-to-end of Bartlett Street. We have seen that this segment of Murdoch has about 95% of the traffic, because we can follow traffic origins and destinations using data collection services. About 95% of the traffic that's traveling on this section of the street does not originate along the Bartlett corridor itself. It's essentially using Bartlett as a cut through in this area. So we've been able to confirm what the neighbors have alleged. We've been able to confirm that with data. So we would implement a traffic diversion so that that wouldn't be possible to use this as a bypass, or opposing one-ways, or at minimum some significant traffic calming that would be implemented in this segment so that we can really hopefully bring down those volumes, but definitely bring down those speeds in this section connecting to Serpentine. We are planning on in this summer reopening Serpentine in part. That of course was closed when a vehicle went through the retaining wall. Of that, there's still more work to be done to fully restore the width of Serpentine, so it can only be reopened as a one-way street, but it will then provide a protected pedestrian way on the reopened street, and a bicycle facility on the reopened street. So this would connect between Serpentine, Bartlett to Murdoch. If you want to go to the next slide. So just some examples of what that might look like. So we can do it with speed humps. We can do it with opposing one-ways. We can do it with the diverter, which is sort of on the right-hand side of this. Not designed yet, but conceptually it's possible to do that. Go to the next slide. Then we get into this middle section, which is all just a one-way flow from Shady all the way to Murdoch. No real changes to the street or the street operations for motor vehicles here, but we would need to address what we've also gotten requests from neighborhood residents on, is to have pedestrian crossing improvements at both Whiteman, which is a very wide street for crossing, and then at Shady, which is also a difficult intersection for pedestrians to cross. So if you go to the next slide. The way we would get the bicycles in there is to introduce a contra-flow lane. So the travel lane that is on Bartlett right now is essentially wider than it needs to be for motor vehicles to travel there. So we can take a little bit of space from that generous drive space and provide space for a contra-flow bike facility. So there we would retain the parking on both sides of the street as it is now, but simply allow the bicyclists to also go in the opposite direction. So it would be a 5-foot or so bike lane going opposite the flow of traffic, and then people on bikes would travel with traffic in that shared lane on the other side, because traffic volumes are so low. That's something that can be safely done, even for the less experienced and more vulnerable people on bicycles. Can you go to the next slide? Intersection improvements are something that we've heard a lot about, particularly, as we said, at Whiteman and Shady. So have not designed what these might be, but it could involve rapid flash rectangular beacons, which is what you see in that left-hand picture with some high visibility things. It could be some striped bump outs that we've done at various other places. The Beechwood Boulevard is an example of where we've used striped bump outs to improve pedestrian crossings. It could be with striped pedestrian refuge islands. So we're creating that space in the middle. But in any event, it's really trying to create safe, shorten that distance. It's a very, very wide street. So we'd want to shorten that distance and increase the visibility of that crossing for pedestrians that are crossing at that street and slowing the vehicles down. We do know that those crossing improvements are necessary at other intersections of Whiteman as well. And then shady, it could be a mini circle like what's shown in the right. It's not designed yet, but shady is another place where it's an uncontrolled pedestrian crossing. There are significant volumes of pedestrians at that intersection as well. We'd want to look at improvements for. Go to the next slide. And so, the segment then it continues from Shady to Beechwood. It's a two-way segment, and honestly, it's wonderful. There's nothing that's needed to be changed on this street. It's very, very low volumes. It's very quiet. Already, it's a great place for families and others to bike there. So we really just wouldn't make any changes. There's no need for it. We would want to address that intersection where it joins with Beacon, where it sort of is coming around a little bit of a blind curve there to give advance warning of a crossing that's there and improve the high visibility markings of that crossing. And then the bicycle connection would continue on Shaw Avenue, which is a two-way street before it joins with Beechwood Boulevard at a location that already has high visibility crossing and speed humps on Beechwood Boulevard right near the environmental center. So it kind of gets you right where you want to be. It also allows the connection up to Forbes Avenue at that point where the Sharrows are on Forbes Avenue. Making that connection on Beacon there would require adding a climbing lane because it is a little bit of a steep hill coming up from Beechwood Boulevard to Bartlett. So people on bikes are traveling exceptionally slowly. And so to get them out of the way of motorists so that they're not slowing motor vehicle traffic down, but also frankly are safer, we would want to stripe just a climbing lane there. That would require removing that side of parking just on the one side. Parking utilization is very low in this area. Again, it would traffic calm that thing so that that segment of the street. So if you were to park on the opposite side of the street, crossing the street wouldn't be a problem. And there's abundant parking available in that area. So, and Shaw Avenue would need to be paved as we went out there. So they would get the benefit of some street paving along with that. So let's go to the next slide. So this is essentially, what it might look like. The Contra-flow lane, again, the two sides of parking are retained. There'd be a 10-foot travel lane, which is the typical width of travel lanes all over the city. We'd put a 1-foot striped buffer, the double yellow there, which really defines that is the convention for two-way travel is the double yellow line, and then the bikes on the other side of that in a narrow bike lane. So the benefits, as we mentioned, somewhat, coincidentally, this can all help us address multiple 311 and other requests that have come from the local community. By doing that, it connects naturally to existing bicycle connections and Serpentine, the connection on the Greenfield Road, Panther Hollow Road, and Oakland destinations there. It is an all ages and ability facility. And it concurrently improves intersection crossings for pedestrians. The challenges will be working out those traffic calming strategies and the volume reduction strategies. It'll take some getting used to have the Contra-flow bike lane there. So that will just need to be something that we'll understand over time. As that goes in, we do need to deal with those high intersection crossings so that those intersections can be safely crossed by the more vulnerable street users. And there's some other challenges that need to be worked out and kind of working the one-way traffic plus the Contra-flow plus parking in together. It's a bit of an atypical thing to have parking pointing in the opposite direction when you have a travel lane going upstream, if you will, but in Pittsburgh that does occur all over our streets. So, or the wrong way parking theory. If we go to the next slide. Just want to sort of leave this here so that we can have now a discussion about these alternatives, thoughts about making this connection and this kind of completing the complete network for this portion of the city and providing that safe option for travel. So Ricardo, you want to tell folks how we're going to handle the discussion?
Yeah, thank you so much, Farina, for that. And I see that more people join after, in the middle of the presentation. Just want to remind everybody that there's an option at the bottom, hopefully it's at the bottom of your screen, called raise hand. And if you click on this option, I'll be able to see your name on top, and I'll be able to call your name and ask you to unmute so you can ask questions. So that's how we'll be handling it. So just let me know if you have issues finding the option. But yeah, I would like to invite people to ask questions. If you don't feel like talking, you might as well just ask your question on the chat, and that should be totally fine if you want to add questions or comments. But yeah, we really want to hear from you guys. So if you want to ask a question, please use that raise hand option, I think at the bottom of your screen, or depending. I wonder, maybe I could pass it in the meantime to Anna and ask if there is any question in the chat so far.
I'll call one out that I was just scanning the list, was asking about what about pairing Bartlett with Darlington. So we did look at this early on. And that would then have one-way bike lanes on each of those streets. There's a few challenges in doing that, why kind of keeping it all on one street works better. One is that they don't really join in the end. It gets you to Circuit. Darlington sort of, joins up into Circuit, but then you would need to take Serpentine, which is, can be quite hilly and a challenge to make those connections between them. It also, Darlington has some pretty high traffic generators on it. In particular, the JCC generates quite a lot of pickup and drop off activity in that first block by Murray. That makes it also a little bit, just creates more conflicts between motor vehicles and people on bikes. So we did look at it, and the sort of final determination was that we could, it's also more legible for users to have it all on one street. And it seemed that this really could kind of fit it all there and really help to traffic calm that street.
Sounds good. I see a raise hand option, a raise hand now, and Anna in the chat is reminding people that for some reason you don't see that raise hand. It could be under reaction, so you could try to check there just in case. Daniel, would you like to unmute yourself?
Thank you. First of all, I just want to say thank you. I think that it's very clear that you have paid a lot of energy and attention to the residents of the area and really listening. And the alternative of using Bartlett Street to Beacon seems like a really viable option and a complete one because it connects with the park. It still leaves the idea of complete street improvement, especially with regard to Beacon Street, up in the air as far as I'm concerned, which is really necessary. And I was just wondering if that is still something that's being considered in terms of the safety considerations, particularly with, I live next door to Hillel Academy. I've been here on this block for nearly 50 years. And the safety concerns are significant with respect to Hillel Academy, the intersection of Munhall Road. And we really need traffic slowing, traffic calming efforts here, and efforts to make the discharge and pickup of students much more safe. So I'm just wondering where that goes, if it's going to be considered for the bike lanes to go onto Bartlett Street.
Thank you, Mr. Ledger. I think, oops. Oh, definitely we unearthed in the course of this project, we unearthed some other concerns that we're not just going to walk away from with regard to this, looking to implement this complete street kind of connection, this bike connection through the neighborhood. So we did hear again about the need for marked crosswalks at Murdoch, and then we had also heard about the issues at Munhall. The pickup drop-off is going to take a little bit more work with the academy to figure that out, and we would be committed to continuing those discussions. Marking the crosswalks is something I think that we can do in the nearer term while we work out. Traffic calming on a street that carries buses is always a challenge for us, and that's one that we're still trying to build our toolkit on what we can do. And Beacon, of course, is a transit street. So we're committed to continuing to work on those issues and not walking away from those things, even if the bike accommodation is put on another street. If that answers your question.
All right, we have Aileen. Aileen, please unmute yourself. I don't know if I'll be able to unmute you from my end. So Aileen, if you can hear me, if you can unmute.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. I forgot to unmute.
You're good.
Okay, I have a question I might not have really understood. Are you saying that if you use Bartlett as an alternative, that you will not be using Beacon from Whiteman all the way up as a bike lane?
That's correct. They are two different alternatives. So if we put the bike accommodation on Bartlett,
Okay.
we would not need to extend the bike lanes from, we're not talking about taking the bike lanes away that are on.
That are already there, right?
Correct, yeah.
Like you are not going to add, because my basic comment is that you have two synagogues, you have two schools, and actually have three schools because you have a lot of preschool children, and that also Beacon Street is one of the main secondary arteries. When there's a problem on the parkway or there's a backup, everybody, all the cars are on Beacon, and they're stopped at red lights all the way up the street. So I honestly consider Beacon to just be very, and that's not even talking about the two huge parking lots, and especially when they have the market in the summer on Sundays, that if you put it on Beacon, it's going to be like a death trap for people. That is such a major artery that if you put bike lanes there, it is going to really create a dangerous situation. I think you're far better off if you insist on bikes, that you do put it on quiet streets that are not well traveled, that you don't have people using as alternatives to get home during rush hour and alternatives for the parkway. And yeah, I mean, I honestly think that it's very dangerous. I mean, I live on Beacon and I see how that traffic goes and how hard it is to get around and how congested it becomes. And it's just too dangerous for bikes. It's too quick, it's too dangerous, there are too many children. And I do agree with the gentleman before that, especially the way you come up to the Hillel School in Munhall Road, that because it's at the peak of that hill, you really have to make sure, like, because I know that road, I always really slow down there to make sure that it's very safe and no one's crossing. But that part of Beacon, if you can, even if you move everything to Bartlett, it really does need some safety measures for those kids. So just to please consider that.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks for your comment. I'm gonna call maybe two more names from the raised hands, and then I'll switch it back again to Anna for comments and questions from the chat. So I'm gonna call Richard and then Nathan.
Yes, thanks, Ricardo. Yeah, my comment is that someone is using my name and made a comment which I did not make. Something about safety at Beechwood and Beacon. So that's not me who made that comment. And the real me says I have no comment at this time to the work that you've done. No comment.
Thank you for that, and I'm sorry about that.
Sure.
Thank you for that. And Nathan, please unmute yourself.
Sure. First, again, thank you to your team for putting together all these options. Clearly, this has been a lot of work. I live on Beacon. I sort of echo the sentiments that were shared earlier by Dan about wanting to make sure that we still address some of the issues that exist on Beacon. But for what it's worth, as someone who lives on Beacon, the Bartlett connection seems to make a lot of sense. This avoids, for example, having to connect Beacon to the park either through the path on the meadow or, figuring out how to do that when the road gets smaller. It also provides what looks like just a more direct and chill connection between the two parks. One thing that I would maybe ask for is in the chat, there was a consideration of perhaps protecting the lanes in some way.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to see that. My kids and I, we bike a lot. Normally what I do is I just totally claim the lane when we bike on Beacon to get to a different bike lane. And it would really lower my stress level as a dad who bikes with kids if the lanes were protected instead of just paint.
Yeah, thank you. I actually should have been clear about that. The climbing lane on Beacon, if we took that, because it is quite wide there and the parking lane is generously wide, we could protect the climbing lane. So it could be a protected climbing lane. I should have been clear about that.
Excellent, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your comment. I'm gonna pass it to Anna to maybe read a couple of questions from the chat, and then I'm gonna call Mitch and Lisa. So Anna.
So this is kind of a twofold question. The first one part of it is just how wide does a bike lane need to be? Like, what's a basic width for a bike lane? And then with that, like, would it be possible to make Beacon look like South Dallas and remove the center lane for part of the street to slow down cars? And would it have a left turn lane?
Those were a lot of questions. The bike lane, so 4 feet is the minimum. 4 feet is we don't like 4-foot lanes because it's really tight and doesn't give any maneuvering room and usually puts a bicycle right in the door zone of the car. So 5 feet is the typical bike lane. 5 to 6 feet is the typical bike lane. And then if there's any buffer to it, it would usually be 2 to 4 feet of buffer or protection around it. In this case, because it's the Contra-flow, it's not really protected. It's the double yellow line that provides a degree of protection there. But so 4 feet is the minimum. 5 to 6 is really what we strive for. On it getting wider than 6, people end up using it as a supplemental drive lane. So that's when we change to the buffering. Could Beacon look like South Dallas? It could. I'm sure there's probably some collective gasps from the participants. Some people don't think that South Dallas is particularly lovely with the changes there, but it has been effective in traffic calming South Dallas. So there are strategies that we can do with paint and flex posts that are possible that would allow us to pick up and drop the turn lanes as needed there. We have not designed anything like that, but theoretically it is possible because as I'm sure what the commenter is getting at is that because the street is so wide, because there's just so much pavement there. People do travel at a generous rate of speed through that area as it is.
Thank you. And I'm gonna call more people and then ask the chat again. So Mitch, please unmute yourself.
All right, thank you. So I live on Beacon on the part down by the park. And I gotta say, I have kind of mixed feelings about the plan to move this to Bartlett. But overall, I think that what's been presented here is looking pretty good. I do hope that you continue to try to address some of the safety issues on Beacon, and particularly at this part where people get off the parkway, get off the boulevard, and I see them driving up here regularly at 60 miles an hour, and I actually do have a radar gun, so I'm not making that up. I have objective measurements. I really want to know more about you mentioned Serpentine Drive, and I would like to know more about the Meadow Trail, because the website has this link to something in Riverview Park for the Meadow Trail. And I mentioned that during the last meeting on April 8th, and it hasn't been updated yet.
Okay, I'll ask the team. I'm not sure. I'll ask the team to look at that. So you're commenting that the Meadow Trail takes you to something about Riverview Park.
That's correct. The fact sheet.
I see.
The fact sheet link, it goes to the city's website, and it's like a Riverview Park upgrade, something in Riverview Park.
Okay, so team, I'm sure you're taking notes.
Yeah, I'll absolutely look into
corrected. Thank you. So the question about the river or the Meadow Trail is a distinct question from Serpentine. I guess.
That's correct. Yeah, I really. So I mean, to clarify, actually, I'm really interested in seeing some sort of driveway. Some sort of walkway there. Right now, there's nothing. It's just the road narrows down from like 60 feet wide to like, I don't know, 20 feet, 2 lanes. It's not wide enough for people to walk or bike, and cars for cars to travel.
On Beacon or on? I'm sorry,
Beacon.
On Beacon. Okay.
Yeah. And that's where the proposed Meadow bike trail is.
Yeah.
And I just want to hear more about that. Like, I'm dying to find out more about that.
we don't have more about that. So
okay.
It's a concept that it would be basically to take the Meadow Trail. If we did want to connect Beacon, to take the Meadow Trail and essentially, surface it in a way that would permit people on bikes and other sort of rolling devices to use that trail. So yeah, Beacon is very narrow as it goes through there. And so at this point, we're not proposing sidewalks or other kinds of things on Beacon. There's lots of slopes and other kinds of things. Serpentine, however, there is Serpentine is where the sidewalk ends, as it turns out. On Bartlett, there's a short segment that is lacking a sidewalk. So we would want to look at finishing that piece of sidewalk, providing safe crossings where Serpentine meets Bartlett. And then when we reopen Serpentine for one-way vehicle travel, there would be a protected pedestrian pedestrian side path provided on Serpentine. So there would be, it would have barriers between the vehicles and pedestrians on that. So we would be able to get pedestrians all the way, the length, all the way up Serpentine and all the way the length of Bartlett to the intersection, to the signalized intersection.
Okay, that's really cool. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for your.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Yeah, thanks for your comment. So I'm gonna call Lisa and Finkelstein. Please unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you so much. We're on Bartlett Street near Manhattan, and I think our neighbor's on the call too. And I'm sorry we had a competing work meeting, and I really am impressed with how extensive you've been looking at this. Before the thing on the door, it's the first we've heard of it, and we're supportive, of course, of having bike lanes. I was a little concerned, and maybe you could explain more, that you were going to take away some parking and said there's lots of parking, because there really is not lots of parking on our street. And actually it's really, really, really narrow, we feel like, on Bartlett. And so if you could clarify, and I apologize that you'd have to repeat, are you proposing making it one way? Are you proposing that it would be both ways for the parking, and so you would take over half the street? If you could just do a condensed, and then what's the timeline for this? And is it a decision that's going to happen, so it doesn't matter, so we'll just have to get used to it, like you said, getting used to things? But we know we're one way from Shady to Murray, but in our area it is two way.
Yeah, so on the parking topic, no parking changes on Bartlett. The parking changes were on the Beacon at the very eastern end, where Beacon kind of joins up to Forbes. So there would be some parking changes over on Beacon at the very, very east end. No parking changes on Bartlett. Yes, there is parking demand on Bartlett. We saw that.
Okay, thank you. I didn't realize that. Thank you.
Yeah. So no parking changes. It's still, we still have some work to do on that western end. There's two concepts to address the higher rate of vehicle volumes and the higher rate of vehicle speeds on the western end of Bartlett. And the two concepts would be either, well, three concepts maybe, would be either making it a one-way going toward Murray Avenue. So you would have that segment going toward the heart of Squirrel Hill, while the other part of Bartlett headed toward the park. That's one concept. Another concept would just be to traffic calm it, speed humps, other kinds of interventions to slow the speeds down there. The third concept would be to have a diverter of some types, which is a physical barrier that would, so you could still have two-way travel, but you would not be able to travel the full length of the street. So we still need to look and see which one is going to be the sort of most effective, least disruptive in doing that. So there's more work to do on that piece.
But it would be a two-lane. That's the part that I guess we originally heard that you were thinking of, and I couldn't really tell, existing, proposed. So it would be a two-way bike lane on Bartlett Street?
No, there would be no marked bike. Sorry, yeah, that was not clear. There would be no marked bike lanes on that section of Bartlett at all. It would be the sharrows. It would be the markings that are the bike lane, the bike symbol with the two kind of chevrons, the two arrows by it. It would not, Bartlett would not have, in that segment, would not have a bike lane. They would just share the lane, the general purpose lanes, which is why we need to lower the traffic volumes, lower the traffic speeds. There would be a bike lane, a contra-flow, meaning one that goes in the opposite direction of travel, a contra-flow bike lane from Whiteman Street all the way over to Shady. But that's the only place that there would be a marked bike lane on Bartlett.
Okay, well, that makes sense, because it's not, right, it'd be very bike friendly on our street. Okay, do you have other questions specifically? Okay. No. And then the timeline, if you wouldn't mind commenting. Thank you so much for your patience.
No, this is great. This is what we would like to implement, yet this summer. If we can. This is something that we think that we can do, in a fairly straightforward way. We know that there's demand. The pandemic has seen a significant uptick in the demands for people to be able to travel in this way. Lots of people working from home and needing to get out. So the sooner the better, if we can get to general consensus on this.
All right, thank you so much for those comments. I'm gonna pass it again to Anna on the chat, and then I'm gonna call Sue and then Orina. Anna.
Some of these questions have actually been answered, so I'm going to jump to some of the later questions. But would blocking cars on Bartlett increase cars on Beacon? And on the related note, just talking about diverting cars into the neighborhood from the highway, how that would work.
Yeah, I saw the note about the highway. You know, we have this metaphor of traffic is like water, that when the parkway in particular, the question is about when the parkway gets backed up, when the Squirrel Hill Tunnel gets backed up, that people take all these different creative ways to get where they're going. And unfortunately, you know, apps like Waze and Google Maps and things have just made it all that much easier to do that. There's not a whole lot that we can do about that. Resiliency, redundancy is good. You know, we do need to have that when things like the parkway really go south. You know, the more lasting strategy, of course, is to try and reduce our auto dependency and make it possible to use some of these alternative modes so that we don't have to absorb quite so many motor vehicles as a society when the system kind of breaks down. But yeah, you know, how do we stop parkway traffic from going through Squirrel Hill when the parkway is bad? There's just not a good there's not a good answer for that, unfortunately. Would the diverter or the opposing one ways on Bartlett put more traffic on Beacon? Yes, it would shift some of the traffic that is on Bartlett, but we're talking about low. So again, Beacon right now has about 7,000 vehicles on it. As the earlier speaker said, it is the arterial in this part of the city. So it is actually the appropriate street. I know residents, you know, might not like that. It is the appropriate street for that kind of movement. So it would shift, you know, some portion, I don't think a significant number, but it would shift some portion of the trips, because we would be going from 2 ways to 1 way. So it would be shifting those trips that are going in the opposite direction down, either keeping them on Forbes, which is the other place that they could be, keeping them on Forbes, or keeping them on Beacon. So yeah, so the pairing that with addressing the traffic calming concerns on Beacon would be a logical pairing to do.
All right, so I'm gonna go back to the raise hands. I'm gonna call Sue. Sue, please unmute yourself.
Oh, hi, I live on Bartlett Street, and I just had several statements that I wanted to make, and I just have a few questions. But again, I think it was Lisa had said that she just found out about this meeting. It was just recent, and I did too. I guess, and then I called several people. It was really hard to talk to anybody. And my understanding is that the reason that many people on Beacon Street opposed and objected to this plan, and that's why it was pushed to Bartlett Street. And just several comments that I would like to make. Number one, I'm not sure you're aware of this, but emergency vehicles use this as their route. We have the fire trucks and the ambulances. Are you aware of this?
Yeah, we are aware, and we do coordinate with public safety. So these changes wouldn't result in any changes for emergency vehicle access.
I understand, but then you're asking us to have bikes on here with all the other, with the congestion. What I don't know if you measured this or not. Our street, Bartlett Street, is only 30 feet wide. Are you aware of this?
Yes.
All right, well, and if we're taking 7 foot for each car on each side of the street, that's 14. But we start subtracting, there's not a whole lot of space when cars are trying to pass on our street. And so then you want to add bikes to this, and it's an issue. It's a problem. And so many cars have been sideswiped here, and especially with the mirrors. I just had one 2 days ago. And in the last, I'd say 20 years, we've been in this neighborhood for 40 years now. And for the last 20 years, we've had at least 5 people sideswiping us. And I understand the reluctance of the people on Beacon Street, but it truly is much wider than Bartlett. Or I am assuming too that you understand, that's another point. And then the next one, coming down, or if you're either way, going up from Murdoch on Bartlett, if you're going up Murdoch to Whiteman, that's really a very steep hill. And I'm not sure how people would do that. I think it's really hard on a bicycle. Next, I went to bikepittsburgh.org, if there's survey, and they said only 1.1 to 2% of bikers use bikes to go to work. Are you aware of that?
Yes.
So we're changing so many things for 2% or less than the workers. I guess I don't understand that. And some of my solutions, actually, I've really been thinking about this. First of all, you said that, number one, keep the proposal to Beacon Street. And I understand how some of them are really unhappy. Number two, we talk about equity all the time, and Darlington Road is available. And that's where all the really expensive homes are, and there are no sidewalks there. So if you want to talk about equity, there's certainly another option. Or another one, what about using Pecusset? As you know, it is a cul-de-sac right now, and where the cul-de-sac ends, the park starts to go over to Greenfield Bridge, and that connects right to Schenley Park. And so that's another option that you could have.
Thank you, Ms. Lloyd. That was.
Well, I'm not done, please.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Please. And you talked about maybe making my street one way, and it would really, I don't want to be inconvenienced, and I don't think that's fair. And just for less than 2% of the people, and I understand that people want to bike and they enjoy it, and I'm really okay with that. However, I don't want to be inconvenienced. And I would hope that could you tell me how many cars travel on Bartlett Street every day? And this is pre-pandemic, please.
There's about 1,300 vehicles, between 1,300 and 3,000.
Well, that's a really big range, isn't it?
Well, the street changes character from place to place. So yeah, it's 1,300 on the eastern end of the street, and it goes up to about 3,000 on the western segment as more traffic is diverted and joins and uses that section as a cut through.
I understand that. And when we talk about people coming through the park and cutting off when they don't want to use the parkway or the Boulevard of the Allies, we do get that traffic. So I want you to be aware of this. And again, we have cars. We're 70 years old. So for us, it's a little bit different. And I hope that you would understand that.
Yes. And Ms. Lloyd, we do understand that, and we're trying to find a way to balance them. I want to address the 2% question. So that number is
that inaccurate?
Well, it is an accurate number for the number of people who regularly use bicycles as their principal means to commute to work. When you fill out the US
website,
I understand. Let me please explain. Yeah, it's an important number to understand. So when you fill out the census, you're permitted to answer only one way that you commute to work. I live in Squirrel Hill, and I principally, when I go to work in the pre-pandemic times, I principally take the bus, but not always. I sometimes drive, and I sometimes take the jail trail to bike all the way in downtown. The census is not sensitive to that. It doesn't allow me to choose a multitude of ways. And so those are lost. So the 2% that is recorded there are only those people whose principal means of commute to work is bicycle. So if they only bike twice a week, they might choose the option that they use 3 days a week.
Well,
It
I can,
also only
from what I
reports-
read, I can
also-
only use that data.
I understand, and that's why I was trying to explain,
Right,
because I
I
think it's an
understand.
important one for everyone. It also
Right.
only involves workers.
Right, and it did, and
so-
I said that.
Yeah, so it doesn't capture people who travel by bicycle who are not workers, who are students, who are retired,
Right.
or who are children. And it only accounts for the trip to work, which is only 1/5.
I understand.
Yeah,
I understand.
So it's just to say there's
and I'm not
a much
opposed to bikers,
larger.
and I think you
Yes.
need to understand that. And so what I just think that I'm not sure the percentage of people. And
It's about
and
15
again,
to
I really feel if I
20%
could,
that regularly bicycle.
what
for
I would like to
various
say
trips.
finally, just to close this with what I have to, what I'd like to say, I really feel, because I was just, quite honestly, maybe within the last week, that I found out that Bartlett Street was an alternative. And I was told, and I called several people with the city, and I think I talked to Ricardo, and that that Beacon Street, because the people were unhappy, and I understand that. And that's why coming up with a different alternative. I think you really need to look at Pecasset or look at Darlington, and let's make this more equitable. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, super comments. I'm gonna call Oren. Oren, please unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you. I'm a Bartlett resident also. If this was the State of the Union, I would be giving Sue a standing ovation right now. Just to clarify, she hit upon a lot of the points that I was going to make. So thank you, Sue. And thank you guys for everything that you're doing to make the city beautiful. And, I have children, and we're all avid bikers. And we appreciate everything that you're doing. So 2 questions. The first question, again, just to clarify, because I was a little confused. What section of Bartlett were we talking about that would possibly be made into a one-way? Because you mentioned like the western end, but I'm on the eastern end between Beacon, near Manhattan, and Shady. Is that
there would be no change to that section.
So that would be still 2-way?
Yeah.
Okay. And I work at Hill Academy. My children on Beacon Street, my children attend Hill Academy, and I live obviously on Bartlett. And I understand the pushback, from both people who live on Beacon and people who live on Bartlett. Frankly, I'm opposed to both, because seeing every day at Hill Academy on Beacon, how we have our pickup and drop off every single day in the morning and for dismissal. The cars get backed up, all the way down to Murray. People get frustrated. Kids are coming out into their vehicles. So on that end, I see firsthand every day the negative aspects of that. Then again, on Bartlett, our street, as has been said before, is very narrow, especially when you get to the top of the hill in between Shady and Manhattan. And I even think that it might be at certain point, it's less than 30 feet, because I come every day, on my way home. And when they get to that top of the hill, when it curves around a little bit, there's often, not enough room for 2 cars to fit side by side when you have cars parked. So I'd be curious to know if it actually gets less than 30 feet, because it definitely feels that way to me. And I've seen, and I've had my car sideswiped before. So I just wanted to voice my concerns. I'm not a fan of either option. I'd be a fan of Forbes Avenue if that was an option. My children, I don't let them yet bike on their own to school on Bartlett without a bike lane. And even with a bike lane, I probably would be more hesitant to let my children ride a bike on Bartlett with a bike lane, because it gives you a false sense of security. And our street is just so narrow that I would not trust a bike lane on my street on Bartlett. If it was on Beacon, maybe I would let my children a little bit more because it's wider, so there's more space. But I would still be hesitant based on how heavily trafficked it is. So I don't mean to be a negative Nelly, but I just, I'm not a fan of either option at this point.
Thank you. I just want to make sure that everyone is clear. So if I can walk through the segments and what changes, if any, would occur on those. So from Beacon to Shady, which includes the segment that involves Mulhattan, there would be no changes at all. There would be no changes to Bartlett. It would remain exactly as it is today.
Right. Yeah.
Yes. From Shady to Whiteman, which would include the areas around Murray and, well, really just Murray is the intersection there. That is where the Contra-flow lane would be. So there would be no changes in the street width. There would be no changes in the number of travel lanes. There would be no changes in the parking. The only difference would be allowing the bicycles to go in the eastbound direction in that section. So again, in the vicinity of Mulhattan, no changes at all to that portion of the street. There would be no marked bike lanes. There would not be any changes to parking. There would be nothing. It's already a very nice segment. It's already very slow. So the middle segment from Shady to Whiteman would have the Contra-flow bike lane. So it would just narrow the traffic lane a little bit, which also has traffic calming benefits. Narrow it and allow the bikes to travel there. And then the section from Whiteman into the park, that's the other two-way section and that is the section where we do see the speeding and the increased volumes. And that is the section where the residents of that portion of the street have asked for traffic relief and have asked for traffic calming relief. And that's where we would deliver those improvements. So there are 3 different treatments in the 3 different sections of the street, if that helps clarify it.
All right, thank you.
I'm out of turn, but I just want to thank you graciously. This is Lisa. You just made it crystal clear for me. I apologize that I didn't understand on the first round, and thank you so kindly.
Yeah, we probably could have done a better diagram of that. So it's just a long and varied street. So.
Yeah, I'm glad it's clear. I'm just gonna go ahead and call Ashley Michael, and then we can move back to the chat. So please unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for the fantastic presentation. This all just came to our attention yesterday. I think we live on Beacon between Darlington and Beechwood. I am in favor of any bike lane connecting East and West Squirrel Hill. I was especially partial to the one on Beacon because of the calming I thought it would bring. So I'm grateful to hear that you will still consider calming measures on Beacon. I did have a question though, when you were talking about the climbing lane. I initially was understanding that was on our little stretch between Beechwood and Darlington, but if I'm looking at your diagram, I don't see it there. So did I misunderstand something, or was there a different diagram that I was looking at?
It's true, the little blue section kind of splits off. We would want to take it, we would want you to be able to get to Beechwood in both ways, if you will. Okay, so right. It should include that little block also.
Okay, that's fantastic. And there were several comments in the chat, one of which I contributed to about the intersection at Beacon and Beechwood. It is terrible. It's to the point where I have my 3 children crossing the street in the middle of the street because that feels safer to me than crossing at the crosswalk. So I would just, whatever we can do at that intersection is much appreciated.
Yeah, thank you, Ashley. It is an intersection that needs attention there. I don't want to open up a can of worms, but the little slip through further on is also quite a bit of an issue there. Yeah. So we do need to take a comprehensive look at that sort of whole interaction of where Beechwood proper with Forbes intersects, where the South Dallas Beechwood Beacon intersection happens, and where that kind of slip section, and that's been on our work plan also, but you were not imagining that that's a difficult intersection. We need to make improvements to it.
I know it's
Yeah.
not. And I apologize to everyone for jaywalking, but that's, that's what we have to do over here.
Yeah.
Feel safer. So thank you. Thanks for all your efforts.
Yeah, thank you for those comments. I just want to remind everybody real quick that this meeting is being recorded. So if you happen to join us late, I see some people join us late, so you'll be able to see this recording in our website. So I'm just going to pass it real quick to Annette and see if there's any key question that maybe was asked.
So there was a question about a design with a bike lane, if it's possible when a bike lane is against a curb, if you can make a curb sloped, because they think that it might help cut down on crashes if the curb is sloped.
There are designs that do that. I'm not sure, and specifically where the inquiry is about the bike lanes next to the curb, but there are strategies to do that. It doesn't. It can contribute to crashes in a different way if you don't know how to navigate those kind of sloped edges. But there are designs that have sort of a rolled curb where the bike lane is sort of at a half step between the level of the road, the level of the bike facility, and then the level of the sidewalk behind the curb.
Anna, is there any other question from the chat?
Final question is, what happens at Bartlett next to Murray, where cars travel up the street to park at Giant Eagle?
Oh, right. Good point. So there is another little weird section of Bartlett, as we all know, that has also the two-way travel to get to. There wouldn't be necessarily any changes to that. We have heard reports as we did the walkthrough with the neighbors. We've heard reports that despite that little bump out that sort of is there to theoretically kind of reinforce to motorists that are coming into that block that they must turn into that driveway where the Giant Eagle is. Neighbors have reported that, on more than a few occasions, motorists will keep going the wrong way on Bartlett there, and so as far as accommodating the bike travel, it wouldn't technically be a Contra-flow bike lane at that point because motorists are also allowed to go there, so it would be more of a shared bike lane again there. But we did look at exaggerating, at least with paint, exaggerating that bump out a little bit more so that we can really hopefully get through to motorists that is not, they are not to travel further east on that piece of street. But for the bike accommodation, it's not a problem. It can work through there.
I want to be respectful with everybody's time. I know we're getting close to 7:30, and I really hope that we have been answering most of your questions today. And again, if you have another last-minute questions, please add it to the chat, and we'll add that to an FAQ that we'll be sending to you via email. And again, just a quick reminder, this meeting is being recorded, and I will be uploading it into our website and send you an email with that. So I'll pass it again to you guys if there's anything else you would like to say, team.
No, just thank you. I mean, I think hopefully we'll get a better design up and put it on the website so that we can be clear about the different treatments and the different segments of the street. I think that will put many concerns. Will address many of the concerns about what is happening where as far as potential changes. The only place really that is experiencing significant change or might, which would be in the form of traffic calming, is the section between Schenley Park and Whiteman. Ricardo, I guess I'll let you go with, but we'll look forward to more comments through the website, through other forums, through the chat here, through emails, however you prefer to communicate with us, telephone calls. looking forward to more feedback.
Yeah, totally. And again, just a quick reminder, we have all these different projects, not only in Squirrel Hill, but also in Shady Side and over the north side. And we have a meeting for another really important connector called the Shady Side Connector. So we'll have this meeting on May 5th. And if you would like to be part of that, you might as well, join us. And if you have feedback for that, we'll be more than happy to hear what you have to say on that. And again, as Karina was mentioning, we'll upload like better graphics for the different proposals, and I'll also be uploading this presentation because I know that some of you joined us late, and that's all right. You'll be able to see the whole meeting, and then I'll be sure to also share a survey with you via email as well, so we can hear more of your feedback. But yeah, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. It was really nice. I feel like we had a lot of good questions. And again, if you felt like you had a last minute question, please put it in the chat or send that to us via email. But yeah, hope everybody has a great night. And thank you so much, Karina and the rest of the team. And Jim, of course, for being our interpreter for the night.
Thank you all.
All right, everybody have a great night.
Thank you all for doing this. Appreciate it.
Of course, yeah. I'm really happy that you joined us tonight. You guys have a good one. Stay safe.
Thank you.